The fact of the matter is, most people believe they wouldn't confess to a crime they hadn't committed. After all, it is counterintuitive that an innocent person would actually do this. False confessions are usually retracted, yet once given, they are very difficult to discard. Hundreds of people have been exonerated after confessing to crimes that they didn't commit. The confession has been called the king of evidence. It's as good as a confession. It seems unimaginable that innocent people would actually incriminate themselves by confessing to something that they actually didn't do. But often these confessions come after hours of relentless interrogation when the suspect feels trapped, like they have no way out. Some of them even internalize the confession, meaning that during the interrogation, they too become convinced that they are guilty. This is a case about a father that confessed to a crime he didn't commit. During the summer, many people enjoy spending time outdoors. Of course, enjoying the warm day and cool nights, and Kevin Fox was no different. On June 5th, 2004, Kevin dropped off his kids at their grandparents' home and headed out to the local street fair with his buddies. After all, his wife Melissa was out of town participating in the Avon Walk for Breast Cancer in Chicago. Around midnight on the way home, Kevin picked up his two children, Tyler, who was 6, and Riley, who was 3, and put them to bed on the couch in the living room. The next morning, he had awakened to his son Tyler saying that Riley was missing. Kevin looked around their small Wilmington, Illinois home for approximately 45 minutes before calling his wife Melissa. Now call it a mother's intuition, but she could sense that something was seriously wrong. Kevin had told her that he couldn't find Riley. After getting off the phone with his wife, he ended up calling the police to report his daughter missing. With the help of the police and numerous volunteers, Riley's lifeless body was discovered later that day, approximately 4 miles from the Fox home. Riley was face down, wearing only a t-shirt in a creek. She had duct tape across her mouth. Later, the autopsy report determined that she had been sexually assaulted and drowned. As investigators examined the crime scene, they were able to recover a pair of tennis shoes and DNA evidence from Riley's body. However, without the DNA evidence, police focused their efforts on Kevin and had him go over the previous night's event. According to Kevin, after he picked up the children from their grandparents' home, he went home and watched TV until about 1 a.m., at which both children were asleep in the living room. He then went outside, smoked a cigarette, and then went to bed and called it a night. Kevin had stated to the investigators that the front door was open the next morning. As police searched the home, they noticed that there were no signs of forced entry. That's when Kevin had informed them that the back door lock was broken, and because of this, the door was unable to be locked. Police canvassed the neighborhood and found that a neighbor across the street had reported an attempted break-in the night before as the back door screen was cut. Another neighbor stated they saw a red Beretta in the area, but despite these leads, the police continued to focus on Kevin. A couple months later, Kevin was asked to stop by the police station after work for an interview. At the station, he was questioned for about 14 hours, and at this point, Kevin had been up for over 24 hours. Additionally, he was administered a polygraph, which was used against him and ultimately led to a confession. No one in Kevin's family, including his wife, could believe that he was capable of this crime. His brother then decided to hire a high-profile defense attorney, Kathleen Zellner, who had exonerated over 20 people. She immediately began to focus on the DNA evidence, which had been sent to the FBI for testing, but due to the backlog, had not been tested. It was also determined that someone from the police department called the FBI and told them not to test the items. However, Zellner requested the items be sent to an outside laboratory for testing. When the results were returned, they were unable to identify the perpetrator, but they were able to exonerate Kevin. In June 2005, Kevin was released, but not before he spent 8 long months in prison as an accused child rapist and murderer. A couple years later, Kevin won a civil suit and was awarded $15 million, which was reduced to $8 million. Additionally, the tactics and motives of the Wilmington police came under scrutiny. The case of Riley remained unsolved until the FBI picked up the case in 2009. As part of their investigations, they interviewed a woman who told them about a man named Scott Eby, who had given her a creepy feeling when she had asked if he had heard about the murder in 2004. At the time of Riley's disappearance, Scott lived a few streets over from the Foxes. The FBI agents followed up with Scott, who was already in custody for a sexual assault of a relative from 2006. When the interview was over, Scott ended up calling his mother and told her that he had an emergency and she needed to visit him as soon as possible before he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison. The FBI was listening and decided to interview his mother, who had told them that he had drove a red Beretta. As the FBI built a case and charges were brought against Scott, he attempted to commit suicide and left a a confession letter. The agents were able to interview him, where he ended up confessing to the murder and provided them with details. He also stated that he was high on cocaine that night. Later, it was determined that the shoes discovered at the crime scene also belonged to Scott and had the letters EBY written on the inside of the shoes. In 2010, he had pled guilty to first-degree murder and is serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Kevin and Melissa attempted to work things out in their marriage. They even had another child. However, this event was too much and had taken a toll on their marriage and divorced. Kevin and Melissa have since remarried. Alright, you guys, well, thank you for listening, and until next time, bye.